In 1999, FBI codebreakers, the same people who crack enemy intelligence, wartime encryption, and cartel communication networks, sat down with two crumpled pieces of paper pulled from a dead man's pocket. They called in the American Cryptogram Association. They consulted the U.S. Army's cryptanalytics specialists. They spent 12 years on it, and in the end, every single one of them failed. The man who wrote those notes was a high school dropout who could barely spell his own name, and to this day, nobody knows what he was trying to say or who killed him for it. Ricky McCormick was born on June 14, 1958, in St. Louis, Missouri, a city of crumbling brick neighborhoods and stories that never made the evening news. He was, by most accounts, an unremarkable man. He dropped out of school young, struggled with reading and writing his entire life, and was described by those who knew him as someone who stood apart, socially isolated, prone to telling strange stories, sometimes clearly unwell. He held multiple addresses across St. Louis and had a history of petty run-ins, but nothing that would suggest the end that was coming. What made Ricky unusual was one private habit he had carried since childhood. He wrote things down in a code only he understood, not encryption in the professional sense, more like a personal shorthand, abbreviated symbols representing words or places or people scrawled on scraps of paper he kept to himself. His family would later say he couldn't spell anything properly, just scribble. But those scraps of paper were everywhere, and the last two he ever wrote would become one of the FBI's most famous unsolved puzzles in history. On June 30th, 1999, a body was found in a desolate cornfield in St. Charles County, Missouri, miles from Ricky's home, miles from anything. He was heavily decomposed, lying in the open in summer heat. There was no car nearby, no phone, no wallet, no clear explanation for how he got there. What investigators found instead were two crumpled pieces of paper inside his pockets, pages covered in handwriting. Over 300 lines of letters and numbers arranged in strange clusters, WLDNCBE, SENCBE, parentheses scattered throughout. Letter sequences that repeated but in no recognizable pattern. At first, investigators weren't even certain it was meaningful. Then they looked closer. The FBI's own chief of the Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, Dan Olson, would later say, "The characters are not random. There are many E's, for example, that could be used as a spacer. There are many characteristics that suggest it could be solved, many patterns. The problem is we don't know why it is not solvable." The case was classified a homicide, cause of death officially undetermined, manner of death suspicious in every possible way. The notes were handed to the FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, an elite division inside the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. These are not amateurs. They crack codes for a living. They work on organized crime, foreign intelligence, cartel communications. They applied every standard cryptanalytic method they had. They determined the language was likely English. They attempted to identify the cipher system, whether letters had been substituted, rearranged, or phonetically replaced. They found patterns, clear, structured, repeating patterns, and then they hit a wall they had never hit before. Standard routes of cryptanalysis seem to have hit brick walls, Olson admitted. This is a cipher system we know nothing about. For 12 years, the notes sat in a secure case file at Quantico. 12 years. Unsolved. In March 2011, the FBI did something they had not done since the Zodiac killer case in the 1960s. They went public. They published high-resolution photographs of both notes on their official website and asked the world for help. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people submitted theories. Some said the letters were automobile VIN numbers. Others suggested hospital medication codes, circuit board serial numbers, or reminders Ricky wrote for himself. Someone claimed to see the name Seth hidden in the text. The FBI received so many responses they had to ask the public to stop calling by phone and to stop emailing. The volume had become unmanageable. But not a single submission was verified as correct, not one. The notes remained sealed inside their own private logic, a language that existed in the mind of one man and died with him in that cornfield. There are three main theories that have emerged over 25 years of public analysis. The first is that Ricky wrote the notes himself, a personal shorthand he developed over 30 years of private writing, with no consistent rules, no external key, no way to decode without being inside his specific mind. The FBI's best hypothesis was exactly this: a system of part substitution, part abbreviation, part phonetic shorthand that varied between sections and possibly between the two pages. A system invented by one person and never formalized, has no defined key, and there is no computational method that recovers 30 years of idiosyncratic private habit. The second theory is darker. Given that Ricky could barely write his own name, many researchers argue it is physically impossible for him to have invented an unbreakable cipher. Their alternative: Ricky was a courier, someone in a drug operation, potentially connected to a violent figure in St. Louis named Hamdallah, who had a documented history of shootings and was convicted of first-degree murder in 2002, used Ricky as an unwitting carrier. The notes weren't Ricky's. They were a message being transported, and whoever sent them didn't want Ricky reading their contents. The third theory is the most disturbing of all. What if the killer planted the notes deliberately? What if someone placed 2 pages of unsolvable gibberish into a dead man's pockets, specifically to send investigators down an endless rabbit hole, to keep them occupied with an insoluble puzzle while the actual evidence evaporated around it? In recent years, independent researchers have applied modern AI pattern recognition to the McCormick notes, rapidly testing thousands of linguistic variations to see which interpretations produce stable, coherent, natural language sentences. Some analyses have surfaced what appear to be fragments, references to locations, quantities, movements: 74 Street Park, 35 gallons, Route 73, motel. Lines that could suggest a drug run, a smuggling operation, a transaction gone wrong, a man who knew he was in danger and was logging his last hours in the only private language he had. But here is the honest truth the FBI itself has acknowledged in its public materials. Without additional examples of McCormick's coded writing, without a key or a partially decoded sample to anchor the analysis, there is no method, human or computational, that can verify any interpretation. The Zodiac Killer's 340-character cipher took over 50 years and was finally cracked in 2020 using layered transposition logic and language pattern modeling. Ricky McCormick's notes are older, longer, and structurally different. As of November 2025, the FBI classifies the case as unsolved with no new leads. The CRRU still lists it among their top unsolved ciphers. Ricky McCormick was a man the world had largely forgotten about. No money, no fame, no formal education. He stood alone at recess as a child, told strange stories, lived an unsteady life in a city that moved on without him. And in his final days, possibly his final hours, he wrote something down. 300 lines of something that mattered enough to carry, something he wanted to remember or record or protect. He was found miles from home with no way to have gotten there himself, which means someone drove him, someone knew where he was going, and someone made sure he never came back. 26 years later, we still don't know who killed Ricky McCormick. We don't know what those notes say, and we may never know either. The only person who held both answers is buried in St. Louis, and whatever he was trying to write down, he took it with him.